Hello everyone, enjoy your viewing. A few years ago I was walking through the woods off the beaten track a bit and I smelt this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look and found a dead body. The guy had clearly been there a while and wasn't looking great, all swollen and green and black with various runny bits. The local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I called the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to arrive and it got dark and I was just sat there in the dark with him for a long time. It turned out he had committed suicide. For a long time afterwards I had dreams about him and he would talk to me and not nice things. Mainly about how he was angry I had disturbed his resting place and he wanted me to kill myself. Probably just my imagination, but all pretty disturbing at the time. He still turns up in my dreams from time to time and no doubt will be tonight after typing this. The dreams never truly stopped. Even years later, he still found his way into my subconscious, lurking in the shadows of my mind like a vengeful spirit unwilling to let go. At first, I chalked it up to trauma. Finding a decomposing body in the woods isn't something you just forget, but as time went on, the dreams became more vivid, more oppressive. And then, things started happening while I was awake. It began subtly. The scent of rotting sweetness would drift through my house, inexplicably appearing at random hours of the night. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., my room thick with the pungent, sticky aroma of death, my heart pounding as if someone had just whispered my name. Objects would shift slightly from where I had left them, keys missing, doors creaking open in the night, my dog refusing to enter certain rooms as if something unseen was lurking just beyond my vision. Then came the footsteps. Faint at first, a soft rustling in the hallway or a whisper of movement behind me. I'd turn, expecting to see my shadow, but instead, there was just emptiness. The worst part? The woods where I had found him were nearly 20 miles away. I told myself it was all in my head. Just stress, just trauma. But the real breaking point came one night when I woke up gasping, a weight pressing down on my chest. My body was frozen, my breath shallow, and standing at the foot of my bed, half-shrouded in darkness, was him. His skin was still bloated, marbled green and black with decay, and his eyes, those rotting, sunken pits, fixed on me with an expression of pure hatred. His mouth twisted open, lips peeling back over jagged teeth, and in a voice that was not entirely human, he whispered, "You disturbed me. You shouldn't have." I wanted to scream, to move, to do anything, but I was trapped in my own body, paralyzed by an unseen force. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, leaving behind nothing but the lingering smell of decomposition and a deep, primal terror that I couldn't shake. I tried everything: burning sage, sprinkling salt, even visiting a psychic in desperation. She looked at me with deep concern, shaking her head as she traced her fingers across my palm. "You are tethered to him now. He does not want to leave. How do I get rid of him?" I demanded. She hesitated, then gave me a single instruction. "Go back." I refused at first. No way in hell was I returning to those woods. But the dreams grew worse, the whispers in the dark turning into screams, and the scent of death became so overwhelming that I swore I could taste it. My reflection in the mirror started changing, my face looked gaunt, hollowed, like I was being drained. I had no choice. Armed with a flashlight, a backpack filled with offerings, and a friend who was skeptical but willing to help, I returned to the place where I had found him. The undergrowth had regrown, thick and tangled, but the moment I stepped into that clearing, I felt it, a suffocating presence, watching, waiting. We built a small fire, placing candles and coins as an offering. I spoke aloud, apologizing for disturbing his rest, begging him to let me go. The air grew thick, pressing in on me like invisible hands. My friend started backing away, whispering that we needed to leave. Then, the fire went out. All at once. And the woods erupted in a deafening silence. A shadow moved in the darkness, no longer a dream, no longer confined to my subconscious. He was here. And he was angry. I don't remember much after that. My friend said I collapsed, whispering in a voice that wasn't mine. That my eyes rolled back, and I clawed at the ground as if trying to bury myself. When I woke up, it was morning, and the oppressive weight had lifted. The air smelled fresh, the forest alive again. I haven't dreamed of him since. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear footsteps in the hallway, just faint enough to make me question whether he's truly gone, or simply waiting. Then, the calls started. Late at night, from an unknown number, nothing but static and distant breathing on the other end. One night, I finally worked up the nerve to speak. "Who is this?" I whispered into the receiver. The voice that answered was unmistakable. "You disturbed me. You shouldn't have." I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. My mind raced. How was this even possible? I had done what the psychic told me. I had made peace. Or so I thought. The next day, I found something chilling outside my front door, a small pile of dirt and leaves, twigs arranged in an unnatural pattern. Something had been left for me. A warning. Desperate, I contacted an old folklore expert, someone who had studied spirits and hauntings extensively. He listened to my story, his face unreadable. Then, he told me something I will never forget. "You didn't release him. You fed him." I felt my stomach drop. The offerings, the ritual I had only strengthened his connection to me. He was no longer just an imprint of trauma. He was something more. Something real. The expert gave me one final warning. The longer you let this go on, the more powerful he becomes. You have to sever the bond. But be careful. He won't let you go without a fight. And fight, he did. That night, my house became a war zone. Shadows slithered across the walls, whispers filled every corner, and the air turned ice cold. Doors slammed, furniture shook, and at the height of it all, I saw him standing in the doorway, his decayed form more solid than ever before, eyes burning with rage. He lunged at me. I barely made it out, running into the street as my house trembled behind me. I knew I had one final chance to end this, to sever the bond before he consumed me entirely. And so, I returned to the woods. This time, not to beg, but to fight. The battle wasn't one of physical strength, but of will. He whispered in my mind, trying to break me, trying to pull me into the darkness where he lived. I burned everything, the offerings, the twigs, anything that connected us. I screamed at him, rejecting his hold over me, banishing him back to whatever hell he came from. And then, silence. A deafening, empty silence. The air felt lighter. The smell of death disappeared. And, for the first time in years, I felt free. It's been months now. The dreams are gone. The whispers have faded. But every so often, when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear it, his voice, carried on the breeze. "You disturbed me. You shouldn't have." And I pray that's all he'll ever be, just an echo of a nightmare I finally escaped. I thought it was over. 4 months, my life returned to a fragile normalcy. The house no longer trembled at night. The scent of decay had vanished. My dreams were my own again. I convinced myself that I had won, that I had severed the connection for good. Then, one evening, I came home to find my front door open. My stomach dropped. I had locked it that morning, I was sure of it. My hands trembled as I stepped inside. The living room was undisturbed, my belongings untouched. But there, in the center of the floor, was something that made my blood run cold, a single, rotting tooth, resting on a pile of dirt. He was back. The descent begins. At first, I refused to believe it. I swept up the dirt, tossed the tooth out, and convinced myself it was just a sick prank. But deep down, I knew. The signs were everywhere. The whispers returned, slithering into my ears as I lay in bed. My dog, who had started to recover from his fear, refused to step inside the house again. Shadows stretched in ways they shouldn't, lingering in corners even when there was no light to cast them. The air grew thick, heavy with something unseen. One night, I woke up gasping, the sensation of cold fingers wrapped around my throat. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I clawed at my neck, but there was nothing there. I could still feel it, though, the unmistakable pressure of hands trying to choke the life from me. Then came the phone calls again. At first, I ignored them. I knew better than to answer. But on the 7th night, something in me snapped. I picked up the phone and whispered, "What do you want?" The static was thick, suffocating. Then, beneath it, a voice like grinding stone. "You should not have burned it." A cold sweat broke over me. The connection snapped, but the damage was done. I wasn't free. I had made things worse. Seeking answers. Desperate, I returned to the folklore expert. When he saw me, he paled. "I warned you," he said, shaking his head. "You didn't sever the bond." You enraged him. "Then how do I stop this?" I pleaded. He hesitated, then pulled out an old book, its leather cover cracked with age. "There are ways," he admitted, flipping through brittle pages. "But they are dangerous. The more you fight him, the more powerful he becomes. You need to learn what he wants." That night, I did something reckless. I called out to him. I stood in my darkened house, candlelight flickering against the walls. "I know you're here," I said. "Tell me what you want." Silence. Then, a whisper so close to my ear it sent a jolt of terror through me. "Come home." Home? I hadn't lived in that town for years. But I knew exactly what he meant. The woods. The return. I had vowed never to go back, but it was the only way. Armed with my flashlight, a bag of salt, and a few protective charms the expert had given me, I drove through the night until I reached the forest's edge. The moment I stepped onto the overgrown path, the world seemed to shift. The air turned thick, and the sounds of the night crickets, rustling leaves, vanished entirely. It was as though I had stepped into a pocket of time untouched by the living. I walked deeper, following an unseen force guiding my steps. The trees loomed taller, their branches twisted like grasping fingers. And then, I reached it. The spot where I had found him. Something had changed. The ground was disturbed, as if something had been buried or uncovered. The air smelled of rot, stronger than before. I knelt, my fingers trembling as they brushed the soil. And that's when I saw it. The body was gone. A wave of nausea hit me. I stumbled back, heart pounding. Had someone moved it? No, that wasn't possible. The police had taken him away. So why was there a gaping hole where he had once lain? A sound rustled behind me. I turned, my flashlight beam catching movement between the trees. A figure stood just beyond the reach of the light. "You disturbed me," he rasped. His form was no longer just a shadow. He was solid, more present than ever. His skin sagged, bloated and torn, his empty eye sockets fixed on me with burning rage. "I didn't mean to," I gasped, stepping back. I tried to help. His mouth stretched open, a guttural growl echoing through the trees. Then, without warning, he lunged. The final confrontation. I ran. Branches tore at my arms as I sprinted blindly through the forest. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse hammering. But he was faster. The shadows around me twisted, closing in. No matter which way I turned, he was there, his decayed form flickering between the trees. I burst into a clearing, tripping over exposed roots. Pain shot through my ankle, but I had no time to dwell on it. I grabbed the salt from my bag, forming a rough circle around myself. My hands shook as I lit a match, throwing it onto a bundle of sage and herbs. "Leave me alone," I shouted. "You are not of this world. I release you." The wind howled. The trees groaned as if in pain. His voice erupted in an ear-splitting shriek, rattling my skull. "You cannot undo what has been done." The flames leapt higher. The salt circle glowed faintly. His form twisted, distorting as if the air itself was trying to consume him. His shrieks grew distant, stretched thin. And then, silence. The woods were still. The oppressive weight lifted. The presence was gone. I didn't wait to see if it would return. I limped back to my car, hands shaking as I started the engine. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The woods stood quiet, dark, and unmoving. But at the very edge of the trees, something stood watching. Epilogue. I moved away, far from that cursed place. Months passed. I changed my number. I tried to forget. But some nights, when the world is too quiet, I hear it. The distant echo of a voice, barely a whisper on the wind. You disturbed me. You shouldn't have. And I wonder if he ever really left at all.